A financial analyst died of cancer at a hospice in Boston, and he woke up in the body of an 18-year-old boy diagnosed with nuclear dissolution and given a prognosis of 211 days. A stranger standing by his bed had sold everything for his sake. The house was mortgaged, the sword was sold, and in the middle of the night, a door appeared in the corner of the bedroom that hadn't been there a minute ago. A single word on the plaque: Mal. First comes the smell: herbal decoctions, wax, the dust of old wood. Then the pain hits, everywhere, in every joint, in every bone. His body feels like wet paper that's been crumpled up and smoothed out again. He opens his eyes. Above him is a canopy with a faded coat of arms, a black falcon on a gray field. Not his coat of arms. He raises his hand and sees slender fingers with blue veins beneath translucent skin. The hand of a child, or of a dying man. A man with graying hair and the red eyes of someone who hasn't slept for days sits beside him, holding his hand. Looking at him the way one looks at someone already buried in one's mind. Father. Not his father. The father of this body. And then the information surfaces on its own, as if someone had opened a folder right inside his skull. Cain Aldrich, 18 years old, Class F Spiritual Core. Core dissolution. 211 days. But the one lying under the canopy remembers something entirely different. Just yesterday, his name was Ethan Rice, 34 years old, Boston, hospice, pancreatic cancer. Last time, he didn't have a single variable left to play with, but here there are variables. He doesn't know what they are yet, but they're there. He squeezes his father's fingers, gently, just to test. The man shudders and leans forward, whispers about healers, about a new elixir, about a master from the capital who's coming tomorrow. Cain isn't listening to the words. He's listening to the voice. It's the voice of a bankrupt man. He's heard it hundreds of times in meeting rooms. Clients would come with folders full of debt and eyes full of hope that someone would find a way out. A way out wasn't always found, but Cain always looked for it. 211 days is 7 months. 7 months to take inventory of assets, to assess risks, to search for liquidity in a system he doesn't yet understand. Enough. In his past life, he closed the books for multinational corporations in less time. In the morning, a healer arrives in a blue robe. He places his palm on his chest. He closes his eyes. A minute later, he takes his father aside. He whispers. The core is disintegrating faster than it was a month ago. The elixirs slow the process but don't stop it. The master from the capital will confirm this but won't change it. The healer leaves. His father returns with the look of someone leaving an oncologist's office. Cain knows that face. He's seen it in the mirror for 2 years. Father takes his hand, says everything will be fine. Cain doesn't argue. In the hospice, he used to say the same thing to the nurses, the professional lie of the dying. Instead of arguing, he asks for a book, any book. His father freezes. In 18 years, Cain Aldrich has never once asked for a book. He could barely count to 100. Class F isn't just a frail body, it's a slow memory, a dull mind. A boy everyone loved and expected nothing from. But the boy is gone. There is an analyst with 12 years of experience in derivatives in a body with an expiring shelf life. And the first thing the analyst does in a new place, he reads the documentation. His father brings a reference book on the rank system. Cain opens the first page. The letters are unfamiliar, but easy to read. His body's memory knows the language. His mind's memory knows how to extract 200 pages of text per hour. 3 hours later, he knows this world. The Valgrren Empire. Ranks from F to SSS. The Altar of Revelation. The Hunters' Guilds. Dungeons. Cores. Classes. Skills. Everything is structured. Everything follows the rules. Cain closes the book and stares at the ceiling. Where there are rules, there are loopholes. Where there are loopholes, there is arbitration. Where there is arbitration, there is profit. He doesn't know what kind yet, but for the first time that day, he smiles. By evening, he asks for a second book, a specific one, the estate's ledger. His father freezes. He quietly asks why. Cain replies that he wants to understand how much his treatment costs. His father turns pale. He says there's no need to think about it. Cain replies that he's already thinking about it, and he'll think more effectively if he sees the numbers. His father stares at him for a long time, as if at a stranger. Then he leaves and returns with a thick, leather-bound notebook. Cain opens it, and it's as if he's coming home. Numbers, columns, income, expenses, debts. The language he speaks better than any other. In 10 minutes, he sees it all. The estate is on the brink. Income from the land has plummeted by half in 3 years. Cain's medical treatment eats up 2/3 of the budget. His father sold the family sword, sold his mother's collection, mortgaged the East Wing, took out 3 loans from loan sharks at exorbitant interest rates. And the worst part? The grain supply contract, signed 4 years ago during the epidemic when prices tripled. The epidemic is over. Prices have returned to normal. The contract remains. His father has been overpaying the supplier 12% every month for 4 years straight. Not because the supplier is a fraud, but because his father is too crushed by grief to reread his own contract. Cain turns the page. He finds a copy of the contract between the sheets. He reads, Article 9, Clause 3. Termination due to a change in market conditions caused by force majeure. The epidemic was declared a force majeure by Imperial decree. No one has revoked the decree. The clause works both ways. Cain closes the notebook, and for the first time since waking up, he feels what he used to feel before every major deal. Not hope. Hope is for those who lack calculations. He feels confidence in the numbers. He doesn't sleep at night. His body aches. The core in his chest throbs with a dull pain like a tooth about to fall out. He counts the ceiling beams. 14. Dark oak. Cracks. The house is old. The house is dying along with him. Around midnight, the air changes. Not in a flash. It just gets denser, colder, with a metallic taste on his tongue. Cain turns his head. There's a door in the corner. It wasn't there a minute ago. Wooden. Old. A brass handle. A sign at eye level. One word. Mall. The door doesn't glow. It doesn't beckon. It just stands there and waits, like a 24-hour store. Cain sits down. Pain shoots through his spine. He clenches his teeth. He lowers his legs onto the cold stone. He stands up. He's unsteady. 1 step. Another. Another. 5 steps to the door. He grabs the handle. The brass is warm, like a stranger's hand. It pulls him in. The door opens silently. Beyond it, a corridor bathed in soft, silvery light. White stone, black marble. Absolute silence. Cain steps inside. The corridor leads him into a circular hall with a high ceiling and display cases along the walls. Dozens of display cases, 1 item in each. Vials, scrolls, stones, gloves, rings, books. Above each one, a label with a description and a price. 1 coin. Everywhere, 1 coin. Every item in the hall costs exactly 1 coin. In the center, a counter. Behind the counter, a girl, young, pale, dressed in white, with eyes in which something is wrong. Too much time, too much silence. She tilts her head. She says, "Welcome to the 1 coin mall." That he's a new customer, that the rules are on the counter and he should read them before touching anything. Cain takes a thin book with a gray cover from the counter, opens it, and reads it as he used to read prospectuses in a past life. every word, every clause, every footnote in small print. 20 minutes later, he closes it. He says he has no coins. The girl replies that the first coin is lying on the floor of his bedroom, a silver one, a trial coin, one for every new customer. Cain nods, turns around, walks back down the hallway, steps into the room. The door behind him disappears. A silver coin lies on the floor by the bed, small, heavy, cold. He picks it up and clenches it in his fist. 211 days. A body falling apart. A world of ranks. A father who sold everything. And a store where everything costs a single coin. Cain lies back down. He closes his eyes, and for the first time in all the 211 days he's been given, he thinks not about how much time he has left, but about how to spend it. In the morning, Cain woke up and for the first 3 seconds thought he'd dreamed about Maul. Then he unclenched his left fist. The coin lay in his palm. Real. Heavy. With a smooth surface, without a single mark. He hid it under his pillow and called for his father. His father came in a minute later. His eyes were red, so he hadn't slept again. Cain asked him to sit down. He said he'd read the ledger. His father started to say that he shouldn't have done that. Cain raised his hand. The gesture was weak, but his father fell silent. Cain said that the grain supply contract could be terminated. He said there was a force majeure clause in the contract. He said that the epidemic 4 years ago had been declared a force majeure by Imperial decree, and that the decree was still in effect. He said that if his father terminated the contract under this clause, he would return the 200 gold coins he had overpaid. That would cover medical expenses for another 4 months. Father listened in silence. Then he asked how Cain knew this. Cain replied that he had read it in a book. Father said that 3 months ago, Cain couldn't even read a price tag at the market. A silence hung in the air. Cain looked at his father looked at his son. There was no joy in his father's eyes, there was fear. Cain knew that fear. Relatives of the dying see it all the time. It is the fear of the final flare-up. When, a week before death, the patient suddenly gets out of bed and begins to speak clearly and distinctly, and everyone thinks a miracle has happened. And then he falls and never gets up again. His father feared that Cain was that very flash. Cain couldn't explain the truth. He couldn't say that inside this body sat a 34-year-old financier from another world. So he said the only thing he could. He said he was asking his father to trust him, just once. If the calculation turned out to be wrong, he wouldn't ask again. His father was silent for a long time. Then he stood up. He took the ledger. He sat down at the table and began writing a letter to the supplier. Cain dictated the wording from his bed. Every word, every point. References to the contract clauses, references to the Imperial decree. A demand for a refund of the overpayment. His father wrote, and his hands were trembling, not from weakness, from something else. When the letter was finished, father stamped it and looked at his son, and Cain saw tears streaming down his father's face, silently, without a sound. Father left the room with the letter in his hand. Cain leaned back against the pillow, closed his eyes. It had taken 20 minutes. He was exhausted as if he'd run a marathon. His body was in terrible shape. Every effort drained him completely. But the calculation was correct. He knew it. 200 gold pieces would be returned. It wouldn't save the family, but it would buy time, and time is the only asset that cannot be replaced. Around noon, a woman came to see Cain. She was short, with calloused hands and a weary face. The estate's housekeeper. Her name was Helen Soren. She brought him broth and herbal tea and looked at him with that expression he was beginning to recognize, a mixture of pity and habit. She had been caring for him for a long time, helped him bathe, changed his linens, brought him food. To her, he was part of the job, a part that would soon be over. Cain drank the broth and asked how she was feeling. Helen was surprised. She said she was fine. Cain looked at her more closely. A gray complexion, swollen knuckles, slight shortness of breath when walking up the stairs. He asked how long her hands had been hurting in the mornings. Helen froze. Then she said quietly that it was just her age. Cain didn't argue, but he remembered. In his past life, he'd looked at numbers and seen hidden problems. In this life, he was starting to look at people the same way. And that frightened him. And at the same time, it was the only thing he knew how to do. After lunch, Cain picked up the ledger again. This time, he wasn't looking for mistakes. He was looking for structure. The Aldrich estate was small. Land, pastures, a small village an hour's drive away, 12 tenant families, income from rent, income from wool sales, taxes to the Imperial treasury, taxes to the provincial governor, household expenses, servants' wages, medical expenses. Everything was recorded in his father's neat handwriting, and everything screamed one thing. The estate was slowly sinking. Not because of wastefulness, not because of stupidity. It was because the world was changing, and my father wasn't changing with it. Wool prices had fallen because the Hunters Guild had opened a new dungeon in the south, and materials cheaper than wool had flooded in from there. Tenants began to leave because they were paid more in the south. Taxes were rising because the Empire was preparing for war with the dungeons. And against this backdrop, his father was spending his last pennies on healers for a son who was dying anyway. Cain closed the book. He needed a plan. Not a treatment plan, a restructuring plan. As if the estate were a company on the brink of bankruptcy. He knew how to save companies like that. He'd been doing it for 12 years. He needed to find hidden assets, cut unprofitable expenses, reallocate resources, and find a new source of income that no one else could see. But to do that, he had to get out of bed. That evening, he tried, holding onto the wall, one step at a time. 4 meters from the bed to the window. He covered them in 10 minutes. He stood by the window and looked out. The estate's courtyard, the old garden, a stone wall with potholes. Beyond the wall, fields stretching to the horizon. The sky was gray, cold, alien, but beautiful. Cain stood there, breathing. Every breath came with effort. The core of his chest ached, his legs buckled. He gave himself 3 minutes, then he went back to bed. The same 10 minutes, the same 4 meters. When he lay back down, he was shaking, but he was smiling. 4 meters today, 8 tomorrow. In the hospice, he couldn't even do that. Here, he had a variable that wasn't there in his past life. The mall, the coin under the pillow, a shop where everything costs a single coin and where he saw a vial with an inscription that caught his eye. Skill, breath of ash, rank E. Allows the body to function 20% more efficiently for 1 hour a day. 20% is not much for a healthy person. For a body falling apart, it's the difference between lying down and walking. At night, the door appeared again, exactly at midnight. The same smell of metal, the same wooden doorway with a brass handle. Cain stood up, faster this time. He walked down the hallway. He entered the hall. The girl in white stood behind the counter as if she hadn't moved since his last visit. Maybe she hadn't. Cain walked up to the display case. He found the vial. He read the description again. Breath of ashes, rank E. The skill becomes embedded in the owner's spiritual core. Single-use activation, irreversible. He looked at the girl. He asked what irreversible meant. She replied that the skill becomes part of the core, like a birthmark. It can't be removed. Cain nodded. He took out a coin. He placed it on the counter. The coin clinked softly and vanished. The vial in the display case glowed and moved onto the counter right in front of him. Cain took it. Small, glass, with a cloudy liquid inside. The girl said he had to drink it here. Cain opened the stopper. The liquid smelled of ash and something sweet. He drank it in one gulp. Nothing happened. Then inside, right in the center of his chest, where the core ached, something stirred, as if a tiny flame had flared up and gone out, and the air suddenly felt lighter, just a little, about 20%. Cain took a deep breath. For the first time since he'd been in this body, the breath didn't cause him pain. He looked at the girl. She was looking at him. Something flashed in her eyes. Not surprise, more like recognition, as if she'd seen it dozens of times. That moment when the buyer breathes without pain for the first time and forgets for a second that they're dying. Cain turned and walked toward the exit. Then he stopped, turned back, asked her name. She paused, then said her name was Yuna, just Yuna. Cain nodded. He said he'd be back. Yuna replied that they all say that. Cain stepped out into the hallway. The door closed behind him. He stood in the dark bedroom and breathed, easily. 1 hour a day, 60 minutes of a normal body. 60 minutes to do what others don't need to do because their bodies function on their own. 60 minutes. That was his starting capital. And Cain Aldrich knew how to work with a small capital. For 3 days, Cain learned to use a single hour. He activated the breath of ashes right after dawn, at exactly 6 in the morning. He planned every minute in advance. The first 15 minutes for his body, walking down the hallway, back and forth, back and forth. His muscles burned but obeyed. After 3 days, he could walk from the bedroom to his father's study without holding onto the wall. The next 30 minutes were for work. He sat down at the desk and sorted through the estate's documents, expenses, contracts, letters from creditors. The last 15 minutes were for observation. He sat by the window and watched the courtyard, the servants, who came and when, at who was avoiding whom, at who was smiling and who was averting their eyes. In his past life, he had read financial reports. In this one, he was learning to read people. The reply from the grain supplier arrived on the 4th day. Cain sat beside his father as he opened the letter. His father's hands were trembling. He read for a long time. Then he put the letter on the table and looked at his son. The supplier had agreed to the termination. He had accepted the force majeure clause. 214 gold coins had been returned to the estate's account, 14 more than Cain had expected. Late fees he hadn't accounted for. His father said he didn't understand how that had happened. Cain replied that sometimes you just have to read the fine print. His father didn't laugh, but for the first time in a month, his shoulders relaxed. Not from fatigue, from relief. That same evening, Cain asked his father for access to the correspondence with neighboring estates. His father asked why. Cain said he wanted to understand the market. His father gave it to him. Cain read until midnight. 3 estates in the county. The Whitmore family to the east, the Grains family to the south, the Hartley family to the west. All in similar straits. All were losing money. All were paying too much for things they could buy cheaper. And more importantly, they were all buying the same things from different suppliers at different prices. The Whitmores paid 30% more for medicinal herbs than the Grains. The Grains overpaid for firewood because their forest had been cleared. The Hartleys sold wool at half price because they had no access to merchants in the capital. Cain saw it instantly. 3 families, 3 separate losses. 1 solution. Joint purchasing. Combine orders. Negotiate a wholesale price with a single supplier. Share logistics. It was so simple that he couldn't understand why no one had done it before. Then he realized, because in this world, noble families didn't talk to each other about money. Money was a shameful subject. Rank, honor, glory. Those things were acceptable. Talking about how much you paid for firewood was beneath one's dignity. Cain smirked. In Boston, too, there were people who considered conversations about money vulgar. Usually, they were the first to go bankrupt. The next morning, Cain asked his father to invite the neighbors over for dinner. His father looked at him as if he were crazy. He said the Aldriches hadn't had guests in 2 years, that the house was in terrible shape, that there weren't enough servants, that it was embarrassing to show off empty rooms. Cain said that was exactly why they should invite them, because the neighbors had the same empty rooms and the same embarrassment. And if one of them admitted it first, the rest would breathe a sigh of relief. His father was silent for a long time. Then he sat down and wrote 3 invitations. The dinner was set for 5 days later. Cain spent those 5 days preparing. He drew up a table, 3 columns, 3 families, each family's expenses, each family's losses, and the potential savings from joining forces. The numbers were convincing. 30% savings on herbs, 20% on firewood, 15% on transportation. In total, each family would save about 100 gold pieces a year, 300 gold pieces for 3 families. It wasn't a fortune, but for families on the brink of ruin, it was the difference between life and a debt pit. Dinner took place on the evening of the 5th day. Cain used his hour of breath of ash in the evening rather than the morning. It was risky. He'd spent the whole day in bed, conserving his strength. By 6 in the evening, he activated the skill. He stood up. He got dressed with Helen's help. An old doublet, a bit too big. He had lost weight. He went down the stairs. Every step echoed in his knees, but he walked steadily. The guests were already in the dining room. Lord Whitmore, elderly, hefty, with the face of a man who was used to giving orders but had long since lost those he commanded. Lady Graines, a widow, slender, with cold eyes and perfect posture. She'd managed the estate alone after her husband's death. Young Wren Hartley, the heir, 22 years old, nervous, clearly didn't want to be here. Cain sat down at the table. His father introduced him. The guests looked. He saw what they were seeing, a thin boy with gray skin and dark circles under his eyes, dying. Why had they brought him to dinner? Cain waited until the soup was served. Then he spoke. He didn't start with numbers. He started with a question. He asked Lord Whitmore how much he had paid for the last batch of medicinal herbs. Whitmore choked. He cleared. He said it was a private matter. Cain nodded. He said of course it was private, and he named the exact amount. Whitmore froze. Cain turned to Lady Graines. He named her expenses for firewood for the last quarter. Graines's expression didn't change, but her hand tightened around her spoon a little tighter. Cain looked at Wren Hartley. He said he knew how much Wren had sold the last batch of wool to the capital for, and he said it was half the actual price. Wren blushed to the tips of his ears. There was silence for about 10 seconds. Then Cain placed 3 sheets of paper on the table, 1 in front of each guest. Each sheet contained a calculation, their expenses, their losses, and the amount they would save if they started working together. He didn't try to persuade them. He didn't pressure them. He simply laid out the numbers and fell silent. Whitmore picked up a sheet. He read it for a minute. Then he looked at Cain with a long gaze. He asked who had taught him. Cain replied that the numbers teach themselves if you look at them long enough. Lady Graines folded her sheet in 4 and tucked it into her sleeve. She said she would think it over. Wren Hartley simply nodded and stared at his plate. Dinner continued. The conversation turned to the weather and the harvest. But Cain could see that the guests were looking at him differently, not as a dying boy, as something incomprehensible, frightening, and a little bit encouraging. When the guests left and Cain went back up to his bedroom, the hour of the breath of ashes was already over. He made his way up the last few steps on sheer stubbornness. He lay down in bed. His body was shaking. His core throbbed with pain. But a coin clinked softly on the floor by the bed. A small one. Silver. Warm. A coin of intent. Cain closed his eyes and clenched it in his fist. 1 coin for 1 idea that would save 3 families from ruin. A fair trade. 2 days later, a letter arrived from Lady Graines. She agreed to the joint purchasing arrangement. 4 days later, Whitmore agreed. Wren Hartley was the last to agree, and only after his mother had read Cain's calculations and burst into tears. Because for the first time in a year, someone had told her there was a way out. The coin burned in his pocket. Cain felt its weight all the next day. Not its physical weight, it was light. But it meant the system worked. that the mall paid for specific things, not for kindness in general, not for intentions, for results. For the fact that he saw someone else's problem and solved it in a way that person couldn't have done on their own. It was a clear mechanism, like a stock exchange. Like a derivatives market. There is demand, there is supply, there is a price. You just need to understand exactly what is being bought and what is being sold. On the 14th day after waking up, Cain sat in his father's office poring over the ledgers of 3 estates. After dinner, the neighbors began sending in their records. Not all of them, not willingly, but they sent them. Lady Grains sent a complete ledger for 2 years. Whitmore sent a summary for the last quarter. Wren Hartley sent everything he found in his father's study. Cain spread the documents out on the table and began to read. An hour later, he found something strange. All 3 estates were buying grain from different merchants, different names, different seals, different cities. But the prices were identical, down to the last copper coin. Identical prices from different sellers in different cities. That's impossible. The market doesn't work that way. Different distances mean different transportation costs. Different volumes mean different discounts. Different suppliers mean competition, and competition means a difference in prices. If the prices are the same, that means there's no competition. That means someone made a deal. Cain flipped through the documents again. He looked closely at the seals. 3 different names, 3 different cities. But the ink on the seals was the same shade, dark blue with a purple tint. Only one master in the entire region made that kind of ink. Cain remembered this from his father's ledger. Ink purchases. Gorn's workshop in Valgrren, the only supplier of blue ink in the province. 3 different merchants bought ink from the same master. Or 3 seals were made in one workshop, which meant that the 3 merchants were one merchant. A cartel. A grain cartel that had divided the province into zones and set a fixed price. A classic scheme. Cain had seen this dozens of times in the reports he'd compiled for antitrust investigations. 3 faces, 1 hand, 1 price. And an entire province overpaying without knowing it. Cain closed the books, leaned back in his chair. Thought. In his past life, he would have written a report and handed it over to the regulator. In this life, the regulator was far away in the capital and didn't care about provincial grain. But there were other levers. Cain called his father. He explained what he had found. His father listened, frowning. Then he asked what to do. Cain said he needed the expense ledgers of the other estates in the district. Everyone who buys grain. His father said that was impossible. No one would show their books to a stranger. Cain said they would, if they found out they were being cheated. Nothing motivates people more than the realization that they've been treated unfairly. His father sent out letters, not in his own name, in the name of a coalition of 3 estates that Cain had formed a week earlier. The letter was short. We have found that grain prices in the province are inflated. If you want to know exactly by how much, send us your purchase records for the past year. The replies came faster than Cain expected. 4 of the 7 estates responded within 2 days. 2 more replied on the 4th. Cain sat at the table surrounded by stacks of papers. His body ached. The hour of the breathing of ashes had long since ended, but his mind was clear. The numbers added up. 6 estates, 6 identical prices, 6 different merchants, the same ink. The cartel controlled the entire province. The markup ranged from 15 to 22%, depending on the volume. The total loss over 3 years. More than 2,000 gold pieces. Cain drafted a report, clear, detailed, with evidence, with references to Imperial laws on unfair trade, with comparative price tables, pointing to a single source of ink for the seals. He spent 3 days on this report, an hour every morning. When he finished, he placed the document on the table and looked at it. 16 pages. The first financial report of his new life. His father delivered copies of the report to all the affected estates. The reaction was swift. angry, and collective. A week later, a joint delegation of 6 families appeared before the chief grain merchant in Valgrren, with Cain's report in hand, demanding compensation. And with an unambiguous promise that if compensation was not paid, the report would be sent to the provincial governor. The merchant was a smart man. He paid, not everything, but enough. 1,500 gold pieces for 6 families, 250 gold pieces each. For the Aldriches, it was a financial cushion. For some families, it was a roof over their heads. For one family, it was money for a sick child's treatment. Cain found out about it by chance. His father mentioned it in passing. The Thorn family, the youngest daughter, crystal core fever. They needed a healer from the capital. The cost of the visit, 200 gold pieces. The family had 100. The compensation covered the difference. Cain listened and said nothing. He gave nothing away. But inside, something clicked quietly, like a key in a lock. That evening, 3 coins lay on the floor of his bedroom. 3 coins of intention. One for each family for whom he had closed a hole they themselves could not see. Cain picked them up. 3 coins, plus 1 left over from dinner. 4 coins. 4 chances to buy something at the mall. 4 steps from death. He clenched them in his fist and waited for midnight. The door appeared at exactly 12. Cain entered. Una was standing behind the counter. She looked at his hand in which he was clutching the coins and raised an eyebrow slightly. 4 coins in 2 weeks. Cain walked over to the display cases. Now he knew what to look for. Not weapons, not combat skills. He needed time. He walked along the display cases, reading the descriptions. Steel heart skill, rank C, increases physical endurance by 50%. No. Too crude. Artifact, ring of vitality, removes fatigue for 4 hours. No. Masks the symptoms, doesn't treat the cause. Spirit healer, summoning scroll, rank B. No. Single use. Then he saw a vial in the far corner of the hall. Small, gray, unremarkable. The label read, Grey Dawn Elixir, rank D. Slows the decay of the spiritual core by 30%. Duration, permanent. Cain read the description 3 times. Slows by 30%. Permanent. His core was decaying. 211 days minus 14 is 197. If slowed by 30%, 197 becomes 256. Plus the 14 days already passed makes 270 days total. No, let me try again. Days remaining with a 30% slowdown. 197 divided by 0.7, 281 days, plus 14 days lived. Total forecast, 295 days. Almost 10 months instead of 7. 3 extra months of life for a single coin. Cain took the vial. He placed the coin on the counter. Una watched silently. He drank. The taste was bitter, like ashes and honey. Something inside his chest slowed down, as if a clock that had been ticking too fast had finally settled into a normal rhythm. Cain exhaled. He looked at Una. She said that Grey Dawn was a good choice. She said the previous buyer had spent his first coin on a sword. Cain asked what had become of the previous buyer. Una didn't answer. She just lowered her eyes slightly. Cain understood. He didn't ask. He turned around. He left the mall. He lay down in bed. He closed his eyes. 295 days, 3 extra months, 3 coins in his pocket. The work had only just begun. On the 20th day after waking up, Cain left the estate for the first time. The morning was cold. Fog lay over the fields like a wet sheet. Cain activated Breath of Ash and went out through the back gate. His body obeyed him better than it had a week ago. Grey Dawn was working. The core's decay had slowed, and with it, the general decay had slowed. The pain hadn't gone anywhere, but it had become a backdrop rather than the center of attention. Cain walked along the path leading to the village. 12 houses, thatched roofs, stone walls. A small square with a well in the middle. People stopped and stared at him. He knew what they saw. The Baron's son. A dying boy who hadn't left his bedroom for the past 3 years. And now he was walking through the village at 6 in the morning like a ghost. Cain reached the grocer's shop. He went inside. The shop was small. It smelled of flour and dried herbs. Behind the counter stood a man with broad shoulders and a wary look. Cain asked to see the price list. The grocer asked why. Cain said he wanted to understand the local market. The grocer didn't give him the book. Cain didn't insist. He bought a bunch of mint for a copper coin. He went outside. He stood in the square. He looked around. He took stock. 12 houses, about 50 people. 1 shop, 1 blacksmith's, 1 tavern. Not a single healer. The nearest healer was in the town of Valgrren, 2 hours on horseback, 4 on foot. For a village without horses, that meant any serious illness was a death sentence. Cain took note and moved on. The tavern was called the Copper Cauldron. Small, dark, 3 tables, a bar made of withered oak. Behind the bar, a woman in her 40s with a weary face and hands that moved quickly and precisely. Cain sat by the window. He ordered herbal tea. The woman brought a cup and looked at him. She said she hadn't seen the young lord in a long time. Cain replied that he hadn't been out in a long time. The woman nodded. She went behind the bar. Cain drank his tea and watched. There were 2 other people in the tavern, an old man by the wall playing dice by himself, and a girl in the corner reading a book. Cain looked at the girl. Young, his age or slightly older. Dark hair tied in a bun. Her hands were stained, green and brown, grass stains. There were not 1 but 4 books on the table in front of her, thick, old, with bookmarks made of dried leaves. She read quickly. She ran her finger along the lines, turned the page, jotted notes on a scrap of paper. Then she froze, shook her head, crossed out what she'd written, started over. Cain recognized that movement. He'd seen it in the mirror 1,000 times. It was a search. A person who sifts through options and can't find the right one. Someone looking for an answer and not finding it. Cain finished his tea. He stood up. He walked over to her desk. The girl looked up, gray eyes, wary. Cain asked if he could sit down. She remained silent, which he took as a no. He sat down. He looked at the books. Herbal medicine books. 4 different herbal medicine books, open to different pages but all on the same topic. Chronic joint and respiratory diseases, inflammation, swelling, loss of mobility. Cain looked at the girl. He asked who she was looking for them for. The girl pressed her lips together. Then she said quietly that it was for her mother. Her name was Eileen Soren, Helen's daughter. The daughter of the housekeeper who brought Cain broth every day. Cain blinked. He looked at her differently. The same hands as her mother's, the same jawline, but younger and angrier. Eileen said her mother had been sick for 3 years, that no healer could diagnose her, that she had tried every herbal remedy from every book she could find, that nothing helped. Cain listened. He remembered Helen, her gray complexion, her swollen joints, her shortness of breath. He asked if her mother's illness was worse in the morning than in the evening. Eileen froze. She said yes. It's worse in the morning, better by evening. Cain asked if the pain got worse after it rained. Eileen nodded slowly. Cain asked if there was a metallic taste in her mouth in the mornings. Eileen opened her mouth and closed it. Then she whispered that there was. How did he know? Cain didn't know, not for sure. But in his past life, his neighbor at the hospice had been an elderly woman with similar symptoms. Rheumatoid inflammation complicated by chronic intoxication. In that world, it was treated with a course of specific medications. In this world, he didn't know with what, but he knew where to ask. Cain returned to the estate. He waited until nightfall. The door appeared. He entered the mall. Una was standing behind the counter. Cain didn't go to the display cases. He walked up to the counter and asked if the mall had a catalog. Una raised an eyebrow. She said the display cases with a catalog. Cain clarified. He asked if he could search for a specific problem rather than going through everything one by one. Yuna paused. Then she pulled a thick book with a white cover from under the counter and placed it in front of him. The one-coin mall product index, alphabetical. Cain opened it. He found the section, Herbal Formulas, subsection, Chronic Inflammatory Conditions, page 147. The Quiet Root Formula, rank D.
An herbal blend for relieving chronic inflammation of joints and soft tissues. Duration of use, 14 days. Side effects, drowsiness during the first 3 days. Cost, 1 coin. Cain read the description 5 times. Then he looked at Yuna. He asked if the formula worked. Yuna replied that everything in the mall works. The only question is whether it's suitable for a specific case. Cain placed the coin on the counter. A second later, a bundle appeared before him. A small canvas bag containing dried roots and leaves, along with a little note with brewing instructions. Cain took it. He thanked it. He turned toward the exit. He stopped. He looked at the index book that was still lying on the counter. He asked if he could take it with him. Yuna said no, but she said he could come and read as much as he wanted. Cain nodded. He left. In the morning, he found Helen in the kitchen. She was kneading dough. Her hands moved slowly. Her joints were swollen. Cain placed a canvas bag on the table. Helen looked at him. She asked what it was. Cain said it was an herbal blend. He said she should brew it according to the instructions, morning and evening for 2 weeks. Helen asked where it came from. Cain said he'd found it in some old books.
Helen looked at him for a long time. Then she said her daughter had been looking for a cure for 3 years and hadn't found one. Cain replied that sometimes you need a different kind of library. Helen didn't argue. She was too tired to argue. She took the little bag. She sniffed it. And for the first time that morning, her face softened slightly. 3 days later, Helen walked down the stairs without holding onto the railing. A week later, the swelling in her joints had shrunk by half. 10 days later, for the first time in 2 years, she kneaded dough with both hands without pain. Eileen appeared at the threshold of Cain's office on the 11th day, silently, with red eyes. She stood in the doorway and looked at him. Cain looked up from his papers. Eileen said that for the first time in 3 years, her mother had slept through the night without waking from pain. She said she had searched for 3 years among 4 herbalists and found nothing. She asked how he knew what the books did not. Cain wanted to lie. He wanted to say it was luck, that he had read it in an old scroll.
But he looked into Eileen Soren's gray eyes of Eileen Soren and saw in them something he rarely saw. Not gratitude. Hunger. She wanted to know. Not out of politeness, not out of duty. She wanted to know because for 3 years she'd been banging her head against a wall, and now someone had walked right through it as if through an open door. And she wanted to see that door. Cain couldn't show her the mall, but he could show her something else. He pulled out a chair, pointed to it, said that if she wanted to, she could work with him. He said he had questions that needed answers about herbs and poisons and diseases. He said she had the knowledge he needed. He said that together they would find more than they could alone. Eileen sat down, silently, without questions, and she didn't get up until late that evening. A coin clinked on the bedroom floor that night, the 4th one, for Helen, for the mother who hadn't slept for 3 years because of the pain. Cain picked it up, counted it, 2 coins in his pocket, 1 spent on Grey Dawn, 1 on Silent Root, 1 silver starter coin on Breath of Ash. Total earned, 4. Spent, 3. Balance, 2. Passive, a body that is dying. Prognosis, 281 days.
Assets, the Breath of Ash skill, the Grey Dawn elixir, 2 coins of intent. Ally, Eileen Soren, his father's trust, reputation among the 6 noble families. Cain lay in the darkness and took stock. just like in his past life. The assets column, the liabilities column, net worth. Still negative, but growing. That was the main thing, not the absolute value, the trend. And the trend was upward. Eileen worked quietly. That was the first thing Cain noticed. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't try to please him. She didn't say thank you every 5 minutes. She sat down at the desk in the morning and started doing what needed to be done. Cain gave her a task. Compile a list of all the herbalists within a 2-day journey. She compiled it. List the side effects of known elixirs for slowing nuclear decay. She listed them. Find references in books to diseases similar to his. She found them. Or she didn't find them and said she hadn't found them. No apologies, no excuses, just a fact. Cain appreciated that. In his past life, half of his assistants lied when they couldn't complete a task. They made up results. They embellished.
Eileen didn't lie. She could say she didn't know, and it cost her nothing. By the end of their first week working together, they had established a rhythm. In the morning, Cain activated the breath of ash. The first 20 minutes were spent walking. He had to keep his body active, otherwise his muscles would atrophy faster than the core would disintegrate. The next 40 minutes were spent working with Eileen. She brought books and notes. He read and analyzed. She wrote down his conclusions. After the hour was up, Cain lay down and dictated from his bed. His voice was weak, but Eileen heard every word. They worked like this every day. By the 30th day, Cain knew more about the herbs of Valgrren province than any apothecary in the city. Not because he was a botanical genius, but because Eileen knew the plants and he knew how to systematize the information. She was the data. He was the algorithm. Together, they were something that didn't yet exist in this world, a catalog. On the 35th day, Cain asked his father to take him to town. His father refused. He said the journey was too arduous. 2 hours in a wagon on a dirt road. His body wouldn't hold out. Cain said it would. His father said it wouldn't. Cain looked at him and said that in 176 days, his body would cease to exist anyway, and he'd rather spend his remaining days on the road than in a singer. His father fell silent. He turned away. He stood by the window for a minute. Then he ordered the wagon to be hitched up. The journey was rough. Every bump reverberated through his bones. Cain lay on the soft pillows Helen had placed in the wagon and gazed at the sky. Gray, low, autumnal. Eileen sat beside him. She had volunteered to come along. No one had asked her to. She had simply climbed into the wagon and sat down, as if it were obvious, as if it couldn't be any other way. The city of Valgrren turned out to be larger than Cain had expected. Stone walls, a market square, 3 guilds, the Temple of the Altar, the Imperial garrison, a population of about 5,000. By Imperial standards, it was a backwater. By the standards of a financial analyst from Boston, it was a market with untapped potential. Cain asked to be taken to the market. His father wanted to see the healer. Cain said the healer could wait. No market. The market was noisy and dusty and smelled of fish and leather and something sweet. Cain sat in the cart and watched. Stalls, goods, prices, people. He watched how they bought and how they sold, who haggled and who paid right away, who sold for a high price and who sold for a low one, who stood in the center and who on the outskirts. After an hour of observation, he understood the market structure better than a local merchant who had worked there for 20 years. Because the local merchant was inside the system, and Cain watched from the outside and saw what couldn't be seen from the inside. The market was inefficient, monstrously inefficient. A farmer sold apples for 2 copper coins. 3 stalls down, a middleman sold the same apples for 5. An herbalist sold dried roots for a silver coin. At the pharmacy across the square, the same roots cost 3 silver coins. The leather worker sold belts for a price that didn't cover the cost of the leather. He was operating at a loss and didn't know it. Information asymmetry, a classic market failure. No one knew the real prices. No one compared.
no one calculated.
In a world where everything was determined by rank and magic, no one wasted time on arithmetic. Cain looked at this chaos and saw gold. Not metaphorically, literally. Every inefficiency is an opportunity. Every price gap is an arbitrage opportunity. Every merchant who doesn't know the value of their goods is a customer in need of a consultant. Cain asked Eileen to buy him a notebook and ink. She did. He began to write. Prices, goods, volumes, sellers' names, buyers' names. In 2 hours, he filled 20 pages. His hand trembled. His body was tired, but his mind was working as it hadn't since he left the office in Boston. Cleanly, quickly, voraciously. This was his element. Not magic, not swords. Numbers and people and the connections between them. On the way home, Cain lay in the cart and thought. He had 2 assets that no one else in this world possessed. The first was knowledge of how markets work. The second was the mall, where everything cost a single coin. Buying skills and potions for himself was important, but that was a tactic, not a strategy. The strategy lay elsewhere. The mall sold items for a single coin. The outside world sold the same items for tens and hundreds of gold pieces, or didn't sell them at all because it didn't know they existed. Take shoe cleaning, rank D. In the mall, it costs 1 coin, and no hunter would give it a second glance. But the Duke's valet, who has been polishing his master's boots for 30 years, for him, this skill is worth a year's salary. Because the skill transforms him from a servant into an indispensable specialist, from an expense to an asset. The mall is not a store. The mall is an exchange with a fixed entry price and a floating exit price. And Cain was the only person in this world who knew how to calculate the spread. That evening, Cain entered the mall. Una was standing in her usual spot. He walked over to the product index and began reading. Not a specific section, everything in a row, from the first page. Skills, elixirs, artifacts, formulas, scrolls, tools. Thousands of items, each for a single coin. He read for 2 hours. Una didn't rush him. The mall didn't close. Time inside passed differently, or the same. Cain wasn't sure. He took notes in his head. He grouped the goods by category, by potential buyers, by market value outside. By the end of the second hour, he had a map in his head. Not complete, but enough to start with. He knew which of the mall's goods could be converted into real value for specific people, and he knew that every such conversion wasn't just about money. It was a potential coin of intent, if he chose correctly whom to sell to. No, not sell to, whom to help. Coins weren't given for commerce. They were given for seeing someone else's problem and it. Selling a skill to a valet for money is a transaction. Seeing that the valet is losing his job because he's getting old and his hands are shaking, and giving him a skill that will save his job and his family, that's a coin. The difference between business and what mall does lay not in the action, but in the intention. Cain closed the pointer. He thanked Una. She tilted her head slightly. He noticed a cup sitting on the counter next to the sign. Porcelain, with a dark liquid inside. Coffee, or something like coffee. He looked at Una. She said the customer looked tired and that mall had a reputation. Cain smirked. He asked how much the cup cost. Una replied that it was on the house. Cain said there was no such thing as a free lunch. For the first time in a long while, Una smiled slightly. She said he was right. She said the cost was included in future purchases. Cain took the cup. He took a sip. The taste was bitter and warm and absolutely spot on, just like the coffee from the vending machine on the 3rd floor of his old office. He finished it. He set the cup down. He walked out of the mall. And for the first time in 35 days, he wasn't thinking about how to survive, but about how to live. Cain and Eileen establish a working rhythm and create the province's first herbal catalog.
Cain travels to the town of Valgrren for the first time, where he discovers monstrous market inefficiency and realizes that the mall can be used as an arbitrage tool. At the mall, he studies the complete product index and mentally maps out the items that can be converted into real help for specific people. On the 40th day, Dane returned. Cain heard him before he saw him, the clatter of hooves on the driveway, his father's voice downstairs, quick footsteps on the stairs. The bedroom door swung open. Standing in the doorway was a 23-year-old man, broad-shouldered, tanned,
with a scar in his left forearm that wasn't in his body's memories, a new scar. Dne Aldrich, his older brother, a B-rank swordsman, a hunter for the Silver Vines Guild. The only reason the family had lasted this long. Every coin Dane earned in the dungeons went home, to healers for Cain, to pay off their father's debts, to maintain the estate. 23 years old with the face of a 30-year-old, because his younger brother wasn't paid in gold. He was paid in years. Dane walked over to the bed. He sat on the edge. He looked at Cain. Cain could see what his brother was looking for. He was looking for the boy he'd left behind 4 months ago, pale, quiet, with empty eyes. The boy who could barely count to 100 and smiled when he didn't understand what people were saying. Instead, he was met by eyes that didn't smile, eyes that were calculating. Dane said he was glad to see him. Cain replied that he was glad too. Dane asked how he was feeling. Cain said better than a month ago. Dane nodded, but he didn't relax. Something was wrong, and he could feel it. He just didn't understand exactly what yet. Things got worse at dinner. His father told Dane about the changes, about the grain contract, about the money that had been returned, about the coalition with the neighbors, about the cartel being exposed, about Eileen, who now worked with Cain every day. His father spoke with a pride he couldn't hide. Cain watched Dane's face, and he saw. Dane was listening. Dane was nodding. Dane was smiling at the right moments, and Dane was slowly boiling over. Not out of anger, out of something more complex. Cain knew that feeling. He'd seen it in clients who came to him after their junior partner had achieved more in a year than they had in 10. It wasn't envy. It was the bewilderment of a man who had carried a burden for years and suddenly found that the burden was carrying itself. For 4 years, Dane had gone down into the dungeons. He'd risked his life. He'd gotten scars. He'd endured pain and fear and exhaustion, all for the sake of a younger brother who was slowly dying. And now he returns to find that his younger brother isn't just alive. He thinks. He calculates. He says things he shouldn't know. He saves the family in ways that Dane doesn't understand and can't replicate. Dane was a sword. Cain had become something for which Dane had no word, and it was unbearable. Because if Cain could save himself, then what was the point of all those years? What was the point of the scars? What was the point of the dungeons? What was the point of the fear? After dinner, Dane went out into the yard. Cain waited 10 minutes. Then he stood up. He had saved the hour of the breathing of ashes for the evening specifically for this. He went down the stairs. He went out into the courtyard. Dane was standing by the old well, staring into the darkness. The sword was leaning against the wall. Cain approached and stood beside him. The silence lasted a minute. Then Dane spoke. He said he didn't recognize him. He said that the Cain he knew couldn't do the math, couldn't read a contract, couldn't speak as if he were 40 instead of 18. He asked what had happened to him. Cain was silent. He couldn't tell the truth, couldn't explain that another man lived inside this body, that the boy whom Dane loved and for whom he had sacrificed everything had died, and in his place was a financial analyst from a world where there was no magic, no dungeons, no altars. Cain couldn't say that, because it would kill Dane, more surely than any sword. Instead, he pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. He handed it to his brother. Dane took it, unfolded it, looked at it. It was a calculation. Columns of numbers, neat handwriting. The first column,
how much Dane had earned over 4 years in the dungeons. The second column, how much of that had gone toward Cain's treatment. The third column, how much Dane had spent on himself. The fourth column, how much Dane had left. Dane read in silence. The numbers were accurate. Cain had taken them from his father's ledger and from the guild letters he'd found in the study. Over 4 years, Dane had earned 3,200 gold pieces. 2,600 went toward medical treatment, 400 on maintaining the estate. Dane spent 190 on himself. Over 4 years. 190 gold pieces. That's less than what an apprentice in a smithy earns. Dane looked up from the paper. Cain said he could see every coin his brother had spent on him, said that now he would pay for his brother, not out of gratitude, out of calculation. Because Dane deserved it,
and because Cain knew how to count and could make sure the family would no longer have to choose whom to feed.
Dane looked at him for a long time. Then he folded the paper, put it in his pocket, and said quietly that he didn't know who this new Cain was, but that he was glad he was alive. Cain nodded. That was enough. Not forgiveness, not acceptance. A truce. The first truce between who Cain was and who people thought he was. That night, the coin didn't appear. Cain lay in the dark and thought about it. Dane wasn't saved. Dane was comforted. Those are different things. Coins weren't given for comfort. They were given to solve a problem a person couldn't solve on their own. Dane's problem wasn't about money. Dane's problem was that he didn't know why to live now if not to save his brother. The numbers on the paper were an acknowledgement of his sacrifice, but not an answer to the question of what comes next. Cain realized he had made a mistake, his first ever. He had treated the symptom, not the cause, like a bad healer. Dane didn't need numbers. Dane needed a new goal. And Cain didn't yet know what it was. But he knew he would find it. Because finding other people's unresolved issues was the only thing he was truly good at. On the 60th day, Cain received his first order. Not from the neighbors, not from the villagers, from a merchant from the city. His name was Blackmore, the owner of 3 warehouses in Valgrren, a dealer in fabrics and dyes. He arrived at the estate in a spring-loaded wagon accompanied by 2 guards, fat, bald, with gold rings on every finger. His eyes were small and quick, like a rat counting grain. Cain received him in his father's study. He sat at the table in an old armchair that was too big for him. Eileen stood nearby with an inkwell and paper. Blackmore sat down across from him. He looked at Cain, and Cain saw that the merchant saw the same thing everyone else. A boy. Skinny. Sickly. But he came anyway, so the rumors must have been interesting enough. Torrin said he'd heard about him, said that young Aldrich had somehow returned the money to 6 or 7 families and broken up the grain cartel, said he was impressed, and said he had a problem. His daughter was missing. 3 weeks ago, she left home and never returned. The guards are looking for her.
The guild is looking for her. No one has found her. Torrin looked at Cain and said he was willing to pay 100 gold pieces to whoever finds her.
Cain didn't answer right away. He asked if he could look at his daughter's expense ledgers. Torrin was surprised. He asked what expenses had to do with it. Cain said that a person leaves a trail not only with their footsteps, they leave one with their money, where they spent it, how much, on what, when they stopped. If his daughter had gone missing 3 weeks ago, her latest expenses would show where she'd been, with whom, and what she'd been planning. Torrin looked at him for 10 seconds. Then he took a thin notebook out of his bag and placed it on the table. Cain read the daughter's entries for 2 hours. Her name was Norah Blackmore, 21 years old. Her expenses were orderly. Food, fabrics, books, visits to the dressmaker, the ordinary life of a wealthy merchant's daughter. But on the 6th page, Cain stopped. 3 payments for the last month before her disappearance, the same amount. 5 silver coins, 3 times, to the same recipient. No name listed, just a note. Consultation. Cain turned the page. Another payment. A larger one. 20 silver coins. A note. Deposit. Date. 2 days before she disappeared. Cain showed the records to Torin. He asked if he knew what kind of consultations these were. Torin didn't know. He asked if he knew who the daughter had been paying. Torin didn't know. Cain looked at the amounts again. 5 silver. That's the cost of a visit to a mid-level healer or a fortune teller or someone who promises to bypass the system, the black market for skills. Cain recalled what he'd read in the system handbook. Cults and con artists who promised to raise a rank or change a class. Illegal, dangerous, and very popular among those who had lost hope. He asked Torin what rank his daughter held. Torin's face darkened. He said D rank, Weaver class, non-combat, useless, a disgrace to the merchant's family who had dreamed of a hunter heiress. Cain nodded. The picture was coming together. The daughter of a wealthy merchant with a low rank. Shame, family pressure, 3 visits to someone who promised to help, a deposit of 20 silver coins, and her disappearance 2 days later. She wasn't missing. She had left, voluntarily, to the one who promised her a new rank, or a new life, or both. Cain told Torin he needed 2 days. Torin agreed, left a 20 gold advance, left. Cain sat down and began to think. He needed information he didn't have. Who in Valgrren sells rank-changing services? Cain didn't know the city, didn't know the people, didn't know the black market, but he knew who to ask. That evening, he entered the mall. He walked up to the directory, opened the section, Information Skills. He found what he was looking for in 15 minutes. The skill, Whisper of the Market, rank E. Allows the owner to intuitively sense hidden trade flows within a day's journey. Not the exact location, just the direction. Like a compass that points not to the north, but to money. Cain placed a coin on the counter. Yuna handed him a small stone, gray, smooth, warm. Cain clenched it in his fist. The stone melted like ice and seeped into his skin. Something shifted inside his head, as if a new sense had appeared. Not sight, not hearing, something in between. A sense of flows, of directions, of places where money moves faster than it should. Cain closed his eyes. He concentrated, and he felt it. In the southeast of the city, the dyer's quarter. That was there, something small and fast and hidden. A flow of money that didn't make it into the books, a shadow economy. The next day, Cain asked Dane to drive him into town. Not his father, Dane. It was a calculated move. Dane needed a goal. Cain was giving him a task, not charity, a job. Dane agreed without question. In town, Cain steered the cart toward the dyer's quarter. Narrow streets, the smell of chemicals, workshops with open doors. Cain activated the whisper of the market. The sensation intensified. The third house from the corner, 2 stories, shutters closed, a sign, a clothing repair shop. Cain asked Dane to wait. He went inside. Behind the counter stood a young man with shifty eyes. Cain said he was looking for advice, special advice. The man said he didn't understand what Cain was talking about. Cain placed 5 silver coins on the counter, the exact amount from Norah's notes. The man looked at the coins, then at Cain, then back at the coins, and his eyes changed. He said the consultant only took appointments. Cain said Norah Blackmore had made an appointment for him. The man turned pale. Cain realized he'd hit the mark. The man said that Norah had left, that she'd been helped, that she was safe now. Cain asked where. The man fell silent. Cain leaned toward him and whispered that standing outside the door was a B-rank swordsman who was his brother, and that Cain had a document containing evidence of illegal skill trading that could end up in the hands of the Imperial Guard at any moment. The man flinched. He said that Norah was at a farm outside the city, the southern road, 2 hours. A farm with a red roof. There's a camp there. People who promise new ranks, that take a deposit, and they don't let you go until you've worked it off. Cain stepped outside. He looked at Dane. He said he'd found the merchant's daughter. He said she was at a farm 2 hours south. He said it wasn't just a scam. They were holding people there. Dane didn't ask a single question. He squared his shoulders. He put his hand on his sword. And for the first time ever, Cain saw his face as it was meant to be. Not tired, not confused. Alive. Dane had been given a goal, a concrete one, a simple one. To save a person. Exactly what he was made for. Cain got into the wagon. Dane sat down next to him. The wagon set off toward the southern road, and Cain realized he had just done 2 things at once. He had found the merchant's daughter, and he had found an answer for Dane. Not words, not numbers. A case. Merchant Torrin Blackmore hires Cain to find his missing daughter, Norah. Cain analyzes her expense ledgers and discovers traces of dealings with the black market for skills. He buys the Market Whisper skill at the mall and finds an underground workshop in the Beautician's Quarter Artisans. Through an intermediary, he learns that Norah is being held on a farm south of the city. Cain takes Dane on the mission, giving his brother a specific goal and a reason to act. The farm with the red roof stood in a hollow between 2 hills. From a distance, it looked ordinary, a stone house, a barn, a livestock pen. But there was no livestock, and the fields around it lay untilled. Behind the barn, however, 3 tents, a campfire, and the silhouettes of people were visible. Dane stopped the wagon behind a hill. He looked down. He counted. He said he saw 8 people. 4 were armed, swords and light armor, not professionals, low-ranking mercenaries, D or C. For Dane, with his B rank, it was like a grown man fighting children. But Cain said no. He said a fight would attract attention. He said that if the guards found out, the matter would go through official channels. And through official channels, a merchant's missing daughter becomes a scandal. The merchant loses his reputation. The daughter loses her honor. And no one gets what they want. Dane asked, what then? Cain said a different approach was needed. He said he would go alone. Dane said that was madness. Cain replied that madness was the only thing no one expected from him. He climbed out of the wagon, activated Breath of Ash, adjusted his doublet, and walked toward the farm. Alone, skinny, pale, unarmed, in an old doublet that hung on him like a coat hanger. They spotted him when he was 50 paces from the fire. 2 armed men came out to meet him. One put his hand on the hilt of his sword. The second asked who he was and why he had come. Cain said he had come for a consultation. He said he needed help with his rank. He said he would pay. The guards exchanged glances. One went toward the house. A minute later, he returned with an older man, thin, black beard, piercing gaze. The man introduced himself as Horace. He asked who had sent him. Cain gave the name of the intermediary from the workshop. Horace nodded. He led him to the house. Inside it was cramped and smelled of sweat and cheap incense. A woman sat at the table, holding a crystal. 2 young men waited by the wall. And in the corner, on a bench, sat a girl with red hair and a vacant stare. Norah Blackmore. Cain recognized her from Torrin's description. Red hair, a mole on her left cheek. She was alive, unharmed, but she looked the way people look after 3 weeks in a place from which there is no escape. Worn out. Cain didn't look at her. He couldn't let her know he was there for her. He sat down at the table across from Horace. Horace asked what his rank was. Cain said F. Horace raised an eyebrow. He said that an F rank was a difficult case. He said it would require serious work. He said the deposit was 50 silver pieces. Cain nodded. He took out his wallet. He placed it on the table. Horace reached for the wallet. And then Cain spoke, quietly, quickly, just as he spoke in negotiation rooms when he needed to stop a deal in 30 seconds. He said he knew what Horace was up to. He said he knew about the 6 people Horace was holding captive. He said he knew about the illegal trade in skills and the fake rank-boosting rituals. He said a report with evidence had already been compiled and was sitting in 2 envelopes. One was with the Imperial Guard, the second with the Silver Vines Guild. Both are sealed. Both will be opened if Cain doesn't return to the city before dark. Horace froze. Cain continued. He said he hadn't come to destroy his business. He said he'd come to take one person, the girl in the corner, Norah Blackmore. If Horace let her go, Cain would destroy both envelopes. If not, the envelopes would be opened and Horace would spend the next 10 years in an Imperial prison. Cain fell silent. Horace stared at him. 10 seconds. 20. Cain didn't blink. He didn't sweat. He didn't tremble. He'd spent 2 years in a hospice, close to death. A second-rate con artist couldn't scare him. Horace saw that, and he realized that, bluff or not, the boy in front of him wasn't afraid. And a man who isn't afraid is the most dangerous negotiator. Horace slowly removed his hand from his wallet. He turned to Norah. He told her she was free. There were no envelopes. Cain was bluffing. He had no report for the guards, no report for the guild. All he had was 30 seconds of confident speech and the face of a man who had nothing to lose. Sometimes that's enough. Norah stood up. She followed him out, silently, without looking up. They walked 50 paces to the hill. Behind the hill, Dane was waiting. He sat in a cart with a sword on his lap and the face of a killer. Cain looked at him and said it was all over. Dane looked at Norah, then at Cain, then at Norah again. He sheathed his sword. He helped the girl climb into the wagon. They rode back in silence. Norah sat in the corner of the wagon, wrapped in Dane's cloak. She didn't cry. She didn't thank him. She just sat there and stared at the road. Cain didn't touch her. He knew that any words would be superfluous right now. 2 hours later, they were in town. Torrin Blackmore met them at the doorstep of his house. When he saw Norah, his legs buckled and he grabbed the doorframe. Norah looked at her father. Her father looked at his daughter. Then she stepped toward him and he embraced her the way one embraces something fragile and precious and nearly lost. Cain stood to the side. Torrin turned to him. His eyes were red. He wanted to say something. Cain raised his hand. He said he'd collect his payment later. He said that right now, Torrin needed to talk to his daughter. Not about where she'd been, but about why she'd left. Torrin didn't understand. Cain explained. He said that Norah didn't leave because she'd been deceived, but because a D-rank weaver and a father who dreamed of a hunter heiress were reason enough to run to the first person who promised change. He said that if Torrin wanted his daughter to stay, he needed to stop being ashamed of her rank and see that a D-rank weaver in a world where everyone wants to be a hunter isn't a failure, it's a niche. Torrin was silent. Cain turned and walked toward the wagon. He stopped halfway there. He turned around. He said that 100 gold pieces was too much. He said he'd take 50, and that with the remaining 50, Torrin would open a workshop for Norah, a small one, her very own, where she would weave not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Torrin stood in the doorway and watched him go. That night, 2 coins lay on the bedroom floor. Cain picked them up. One for Norah, one for Torrin, because he had settled 2 matters. His daughter had gained her freedom. The father got a chance to see his daughter as she truly is. Cain clenched the coins and lay down. In the next room, Dane slept soundly for the first time in a month, because today he had defended a living person. And it made sense. Cain and Dane head to the farm where Norah Blackmore is being held. Cain enters alone and, with a bluff, forces the ringleader, Horace, to release the girl. He returns Norah to her father and advises Torrin to stop being ashamed of his daughter's rank and to open his own workshop for her. For saving Norah and reconciling her with her father, Cain receives 2 coins of intent. For the first time in a long while, Dane feels that his power has meaning. On the 65th day, Cain met Saren Vale. It didn't go according to his plan. She came on her own. Tall, dark hair cut short. A leather jacket from the Silver Vines Guild with an investigator's patch. Gray eyes, cold, wary. The face of someone who hasn't slept in a long time and is used to it. She knocked on the manor door in the morning and asked for an audience with Cain Aldrich. His father was surprised. Serene showed her guild badge.
Her father was even more surprised, but let her in. Cain received her in his office. Eileen was sitting in the corner with an inkwell. Serene looked at Eileen, then at Cain, then back at Eileen. Cain said that Eileen was his assistant and that everything said would remain in that room. Serene sat down. Silently, she took a thin folder out of her bag. She placed it on the table. She said she was investigating a series of anomalous incidents in Valgrren province over the past 2 months. The grain cartel has been destroyed. 6 families have united in a coalition. A merchant's missing daughter has been found. An underground farm conducting illegal rituals has been uncovered. And all clues lead to one person, an 18-year-old, F-ranked, dying boy from a remote estate. Serene said the guild was interested in exactly how he was doing this, and whether he himself was an anomaly. Cain looked at her. He knew this moment would come. A rise to fame too fast attracts attention. He had expected this to happen later, in 3 or 4 months. But he had underestimated the speed at which rumors spread in a small province. Cain didn't panic. Instead, he asked Serene why she had come in person. He said that for routine investigations, the guild sent junior agents. A B-rank investigator only came when the matter was personal. Serene clenched her jaw. Cain had hit the nail on the head. He didn't know exactly where yet, but he'd hit it. Serene was silent for a moment. Then she said that the guild had tasked her with verifying information about the grain cartel, that the report Cain had compiled had fallen into the hands of the provincial governor, and the governor had forwarded a copy to the guild, that the guild wanted to know who was behind the analyst. Cain asked why there had to be someone behind him. Serene replied that 18-year-old F-rank nobles don't write 16-page financial reports with an impeccable evidence base. Cain smirked. He said she was right. It really was unusual. And he asked if he could look at her file. Serene refused. Cain didn't insist. Instead, he did what he did best. He began to read. Not the file, the person. Serene Vale, B rank, class, sleuth, investigator. Leather jacket worn at the elbows. Means she's been wearing it for a long time. Doesn't change it, attached to a things, or can't afford a new one. Dark circles under her eyes. Not just not sleeping, chronically not sleeping. For a long time. For years. Her right hand trembles slightly when she picks up a cup. Nervous, not physical. The fingers of her left hand are slightly bent, as if holding something. A habit. A pen. She's constantly writing or rereading. The button on her breast pocket is undone. Something's inside. Paper. She carries a document close to her heart. Not for convenience, so it's nearby. Always. Cain looked at Serene. He asked when she'd lost her partner. Serene stood up. The chair scraped across the floor. Her face went pale. She asked how he knew. Cain said he could see. He said that a person who hasn't slept in years and carries a piece of paper in their breast pocket like a talisman is a person who once missed something on that paper, and someone paid the price for it. Serene stood there, breathing, hands clenched into fists. 10 seconds. 20. Then she slowly sat back down, silently. Cain waited. Serene spoke, quietly, monotonously, like a person telling a story they'd retold to themselves 1,000 times. 4 years ago, a level B dungeon in the southern province, reconnaissance, her and her partner. His name was Alec. Before descending, she checked the reconnaissance report. The route, monsters, traps, everything was clear. They went down. On the 3rd level, an ambush awaited them. Monsters that weren't in the report. Alec covered their retreat. She survived. He didn't. After that, Serene received the report for review. The expert said she had missed a line.
a single line containing a note about suspicious activity on the 3rd level. Since then, Serene has been rereading every report 3 times. She carries Alex's last report in her breast pocket, and she doesn't sleep. Cain listened, then he held out his hand. He said he wanted to see the report. Serene didn't move. Cain waited. She slowly took the folded sheet out of her breast pocket. It was old, worn at the folds. She laid it on the table. Cain picked it up, unfolded it, read it for 5 minutes. Serene sat and watched him. Eileen in the corner wasn't breathing. Cain finished reading. He put the sheet on the table. He looked at Serene. He said she hadn't missed a line. Serene blinked. Cain turned the sheet toward her. He pointed to the spot. Line 14, a note about suspicious activity. The ink was a different shade, barely noticeable, but Cain noticed. 12 years of working with documents. He spotted forged lines faster than the real ones. The line had been added later, by a different hand, with different ink. Someone had added this line to the report after Alex's death, so that Serene would be found guilty. Cain said it out loud. He said the report was forged, that the line had been added later, that Serene had been unable to sleep for 4 years because of guilt that wasn't hers. Serene stared at the page. Her hands weren't shaking. They were frozen, like stone. Then she looked up, and Cain saw something in her eyes that made it hard for him to breathe. 4 years. 4 years of sleeplessness. 4 years of rereading the same report. 4 years of guilt. And in 5 minutes, one boy saw what the guild's experts had failed to see. Serene lowered her head. Her shoulders shook. She didn't make a sound, but tears fell onto the table, one after another, quietly. Cain stood up. He walked out of the office. He closed the door. He left her alone. Or rather, with Eileen, because Eileen knew what to do with people who were crying. She'd been doing it for 3 years for her mother. Cain stood in the hallway and thought. The line had been added later, so someone wanted to frame Serene. So Alex's death wasn't an accident. So someone in the guild knew about the ambush, or set it up. It was more than he could process right now, but he remembered. A folder in his head, a note. Come back to it later. Half an hour later, Serene came out of the office. Her eyes were red. Her face was calm. She looked at Cain. She said she didn't know who he was or how he knew what he knew, but that she wanted to understand. Cain said he was just a man who knew how to read documents. Serene shook her head. She said that people who can read documents don't look at a stranger and see his deepest wound in 2 minutes. Cain remained silent. Serene stood there for another second. Then she said she would report to the guild that no anomaly had been detected, that young Aldrich was simply a talented analyst, and that she would return, in a week, with questions. Cain nodded. Serene left. Cain closed the door behind her. He leaned against the wall. He exhaled. 2 new facts. First, Serene Vale is not an enemy. Second, 4 years ago, someone in the Silver Vines Guild forged a report that cost a man his life. Cain didn't know who, but he knew he'd find out sooner or later, because forged documents always leave a trail, and he knew how to read those trails. The coin didn't appear that night. Cain lay there thinking. Serene hadn't been saved. She'd been shown the truth. But the truth without the culprit is only half the solution. She'd stop blaming herself, but she wouldn't know who was to blame. An open case. Cain promised himself he would close it, completely, once and for all. And then the coin would come. Serene Vale, an investigator for the Silver Vines Guild, arrives to investigate Cain's activities. Instead of an interrogation, Cain discovers that the report for which Serene had blamed herself for 4 years over her partner's death had been fabricated. A line had been added later. For the first time in 4 years, Serene weeps with relief. She promises to return in a week. Cain realizes that someone in the guild is behind the forgery and Alec's death. Seren returned 4 days later, not a week. She stood in the doorway with a folder twice as thick as the previous one and the face of someone who hadn't slept. But not like before. Before, she hadn't slept because of guilt. Now, because of anger.
Cain invited her into his office. Eileen brought tea. Serene placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were copies of the Silver Vines Guild's financial reports for the past 5 years. Cain looked at her. He asked how she'd gotten them. Serene replied that a B-rank investigator has access to the archives. Cain asked why. Serene said that after he showed her the forgery in the report, she started thinking. If a line had been added, it meant someone inside the guild wanted to blame Alec's death on her mistake. So someone knew about the ambush in advance, or had set it up. She spent 3 days checking who had access to the report between the return from the dungeon and the forensic analysis. She found 4 names. One of them belonged to the personal secretary of the guildmaster, Vincent Hale's secretary. Cain leaned back in his chair. Vincent Hale, head of the Silver Vines Guild, S rank, the most influential man in the 3 provinces. Cain hadn't met him yet, but the name had already popped up in the expense ledgers, in the governor's letters, in neighbors' conversations. Hale was everywhere, like groundwater, invisible but permeating everything. Cain picked up the folder. He began to read. 2 hours later, he found the first lead. The Silver Vines Guild was the largest in the province, 300 hunters, 26 dungeons under their control, an annual turnover of about 80,000 gold pieces. Officially, everything was above board, but Cain wasn't reading what was written. He was reading what wasn't written. Omissions, discrepancies, amounts that didn't add up by 1 or 2%. In the financial world, 1% is noise, 2% is an error. A systematic 2% in one direction over 5 years is theft. Cain was compiling a table, column by column, year by year. By evening, he had the full picture. Every year, the guild wrote off between 1.5 and 2,000 gold pieces under an item called Research of Anomalous Zones. It sounded normal. The guilds explored dungeons. It was part of the job. But the funds weren't going toward expeditions. Cain checked the dates. In the months when the deductions were made, not a single expedition set out. The money was going nowhere. Or somewhere only Hale knew about. Cain looked at Seren. He asked if she had heard of any research into anomalies that the guild had conducted over the past 5 years. Seren shook her head. Cain nodded. 12,000 gold pieces over 5 years. Gone. Without a trace. Without reports. Without results. This isn't research. It's a slush fund. The next day, Cain asked Seren to get the expedition crew lists for those same years. Seren got them. Cain compared the expedition dates with the dates of the write-offs. He discovered that 6 times over 5 years, funds had been written off on the days the expeditions returned from a specific dungeon. Dungeon number 17, Southern Sector, Hazard Class A, closed to ordinary hunters. Access only with personal permission from the guildmaster. Cain asked Seren what she knew about Dungeon 17. Seren fell silent. Then she said quietly that Alec had died in Dungeon 17. Cain closed his eyes for a second. He opened them. The pieces were falling into place. Alec and Seren had gone on a reconnaissance mission to Dungeon 17. Alec had died. The report had been falsified to pin the blame on Seren. The guild closed the dungeon. Hale started spending money on research that didn't exist, and it all revolved around one place. Cain told Seren he needed time. He told her not to do anything, not to dig, not to ask questions, not to draw attention. Seren asked why. Cain replied that Hale wasn't a fool, that an S-rank hunter with 20 years of experience would notice if his investigators started asking uncomfortable questions, and that the last person to ask uncomfortable questions about Dungeon 17 was named Alec. Seren clenched her fists, but she nodded. That night, Cain entered the mall.
Yuna was standing behind the counter. He walked over to the terminal and opened the information skills section. He searched for a long time. He found it on page 214. The Pen of Truth skill, rank C. Allows you to determine the authenticity of any handwritten document and establish the date of writing with an accuracy of 1 day. Cain placed a coin. The skill came in the form of a pen, a black one, light. Cain touched it, and the pen sank into his fingers just as the breath of ash had sunk into his chest. A new tool. Now he could do more than just suspect a forgery. He could prove it. Date, handwriting,
Ink, everything. Cain looked at Yuna. He asked how many customers before him had used the mall for investigations. Yuna paused. Then she said, not a single one. Everyone bought swords and potions and armor. Cain smirked. He said that swords were overvalued by the market. Yuna didn't smile, but her eyes changed slightly, as if something inside had stirred, something that had been dormant for a long time. 3 days later, Cain checked Saren's report using the Pen of Truth. He ran his finger over line 14. The skill activated instantly. The information appeared as clearly as text on a screen. The line was written 8 days after the rest of the text, in a different hand. The ink matched the composition of the ink from the office of the Guildmaster's secretary. Date of writing, 3 days after Alec's death. Cain wrote everything down, every detail, every fact. Then he took out a blank sheet of paper and began drafting what in his past life was called a memorandum for the regulator, a document in which the facts are arranged so that it is impossible to deny them. Not an accusation, a body of evidence, dry, precise, irrefutable. He worked on it for 5 days, an hour every morning in ash breath mode. The rest of the time he dictated to Eileen. She wrote. She didn't ask why. She trusted him. When the document was finished, Cain read it over twice, 16 pages, the second financial report of his new life, and the most dangerous. A coin clinked on the bedroom floor. Cain looked at it. Strange. He hadn't finished anything yet. Saren's case was still open. The culprit hadn't been found. Justice hadn't been served. Then he understood. The coin wasn't for Saren. The coin was for Eileen, for the girl who had spent 5 days writing the document without asking questions. Not because she wasn't interested, but because she trusted the person beside her. Cain had given her what no one else had, work that mattered, a place by his side. Not out of pity, out of necessity. Eileen was needed, and for the first time in her life, she felt it. Maul noticed it. Cain clenched the coin and lay down. Tomorrow, things would get serious. Saren brings the guild's financial reports, and Cain discovers a slush fund of 12,000 gold pieces over 5 years, disguised as research into anomalies. All clues lead to Dungeon 17, where Saren's partner died, and to the guild's head, Vincent Hale. Cain buys the Truth Pen skill from Maul and proves the report is a forgery. He compiles 16 pages of evidence. Day 100. Cain stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom and looked at himself. His body was still thin, still pale, but not like it was on the first day. The muscles in his arms were defined. His cheeks had filled out slightly. His eyes were clearer. Gray dawn and breath of ash were working. The core was still disintegrating, but more slowly. The prognosis he recalculated every week had stabilized at 280 days. 180 left. 6 months. Cain got dressed. He went downstairs. His father and Dane were sitting at the table. Eileen was setting the table for breakfast. Helen was kneading dough in the kitchen, with both hands, without pain. The little world Cain had been building for 2.5 months, fragile but alive. His father looked better. He slept, he ate, he had stopped selling things. Dane stayed home. He didn't return to the guild. He said he was taking a leave of absence. Cain knew that Dane had stayed for his sake, but no longer just to care for the sick man, for something else, for that feeling he had experienced when he took Norah from the farm, for a purpose.
On the 102nd day, a messenger arrived from the capital, a silver seal on the envelope. Cain opened it in front of his father. The letter was short. The Imperial Council on Anomalous Phenomena invited representatives from the province of Valgrren to a closed session. Topic: the rise in dungeon breaches in the inner provinces. Each province was to send a speaker. The governor of Valgrren forwarded the invitation to the Aldriches with a note. Young Aldrich, whose report on the grain cartel had demonstrated analytical skills, was invited as a consultant to the provincial delegation. Cain reread the note. Consultant, not a delegate, not a representative. Consultant. A person they take along to stand behind them and whisper advice. That suited him fine. He'd spent his whole life standing behind people's backs. Analysts don't speak in front of cameras. They write what the speakers read off the screen. Cain accepted the invitation. The journey to the capital took 6 days.
Cain rode in a carriage with Eileen and Dane. His father stayed at the estate. Saren joined them on the 2nd day. She said she was going to the capital on guild business. Cain knew she was going for his sake, for the report on hail that lay in his travel bag between the changes of linens. The capital of the Valgrren Empire was called Kairos. Cain saw it at dawn on the 7th day. White walls, spires of temples, the tower of the Imperial Palace in the center. The city was enormous, 100,000 people, with ring-shaped streets and districts divided by rank. The outer ring for the common folk, the middle ring for hunters and merchants, the inner ring for the aristocracy, the palace right in the center. Cain looked at the city and calculated. Population, trade flows, military resources, political factions. Every spire represented someone's budget. Every wall represented someone's spending decision. The city was a financial report carved in stone. The council meeting was held in the Hall of Revelations, a vast chamber with a dome of translucent stone through which light streamed. Semicircular benches, 100 delegates. Cain sat in the back row next to Valgren's deputy, a skinny boy among generals and lords. No one looked at him. It was perfect. The speakers took the floor one after another. Dungeon breaches were becoming more frequent. Monsters were emerging to the surface. Casualties among the hunters were rising. More people were needed. More money. More weapons. Cain listened and saw what the others did not. The numbers. Each speaker cited his province's defense expenditures, and each one inflated them, some by 10%, some by 20%, some by 30%. A classic tactic of budget wars: overstate the losses to get more funding from the Imperial treasury. Cain took notes. He calculated. He compared. 2 hours later, he had the full picture. The Empire was spending twice as much on defense against the dungeons as necessary, not because the threat was half as great, but because a third of the money was lining the pockets of those reporting the expenses. During the break, Cain stood by the wall and drank water. He had spent the hour of the breathing of ashes that morning. His body was tired. His legs were shaking. But he stood, and a girl approached him, young, white hair, blue eyes. The posture of someone who had been taught from birth not to slouch. A dress made of fabric that cost more than the Aldrich estate. She looked at him and asked who he was. Cain gave his name. The girl tilted her head slightly. She said she was Cassia Wildrain, the Emperor's 3rd daughter, S-rank ice mage, and that she had noticed he was the only one in the hall writing down numbers instead of just listening. Cain looked at her. A princess. The Empire's most brilliant catch. A perfect face, perfect posture, perfect rank, and eyes in which he saw what he'd seen hundreds of times in people who came to him with a debt folder. Loneliness. Not physical, existential. The loneliness of a person who'd been loved their whole life for what they were, not for who they were. Cain said she had a wonderful class, but that wasn't her class. He asked what she liked for breakfast. Cassia froze. She opened her mouth. She closed it. No one in her life had ever asked her that question.
No one had ever been interested in what she ate in the mornings. Everyone was interested in her rank, her magic, her blood, her political value. Cassia quietly said she liked apples with honey,
and that it was a silly answer to a silly question. Cain replied that it was the best answer he'd heard all day. That evening, Cain returned to the guest quarters. He lay down, he closed his eyes, and he thought that the capital was no place for rest. The capital was a marketplace, the largest marketplace in the empire, and he had just seen its price list. On the 100th day, Cain received an invitation to the capital for a closed session of the Imperial Council as a provincial consultant. At the meeting, he discovers that the provinces are systematically inflating their defense expenditures. He meets Princess Cassia Wildrain, who for the first time encounters a man interested in her rather than her rank. On his third day in the capital, Cain requested an audience with the chairman of the Imperial Council. He was refused. On the fourth day, he asked again. He was refused again. On the fifth day, he sent a note through the secretary. One line. The provinces are inflating their defense budgets by 34%, and I can prove it. An hour later, he was received. The chairman of the council turned out to be an elderly man with a gray beard and the eyes of a surgeon. His name was Marcus Wayne. He looked at Cain, at a skinny boy with gray skin and a folder in his hands. He asked if he understood that he was accusing 12 provincial governors of embezzlement. Cain replied that he wasn't accusing anyone. He was presenting a calculation. Marcus Wayne held out his hand. Cain placed his third financial report on the table. 24 provinces pages. The expenditures of 12 provinces, actual and reported. The difference, methodology, sources. Marcus Wayne read for 40 minutes. Cain sat and waited. His body ached. The hour of the breathing of ashes had ended 20 minutes ago. Every minute was a struggle, but he sat upright. Marcus Wayne closed the folder. He looked at Cain. He asked what he wanted in exchange for this information. Cain said he wanted the council to review one more document. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Cain took out the second report, 16 pages about Vincent Hale and the Silver Vine Guild. Marcus Wayne read the second report more slowly. His expression didn't change, but the fingers holding the paper turned white. When he finished, he placed both documents in a stack. He looked at Cain. He said that if even half of this was true, then Hale would face a tribunal. Cain replied that it was all true, and that he possessed a skill that allowed him to verify the authenticity of every document he cited. Marcus asked what kind of skill it was. Cain demonstrated. He picked up one of the council documents from the table. He ran his finger over it. The pen of truth activated. Cain named the date of writing and the author. Marcus checked. It matched. Marcus Wayne leaned back in his chair. He said that Cain Aldrich was a dangerous young man. Cain replied that he was just reading the fine print. Marcus didn't smile, but he nodded. He said the council would review both documents. He said it would take time, and he told Cain to be careful, because the people whose budgets he had exposed wouldn't wait for a tribunal. Cain walked out of Marcus's office, and his legs gave out. Dane caught him. He sat him down on a bench in the hallway. Cain was breathing heavily. His body was giving out. 2 hours without Ash's breath. Too much. Dane looked at him. He said Cain was an idiot. Cain agreed. Eileen brought water. Saren stood by the wall, keeping watch over the hallway. A small army, 4 people, one of whom couldn't stand on his own 2 feet. Cain drank the water and thought, the documents have been accepted. The council will review them. Hale doesn't know yet, but he will find out, and when he does, he won't wait. Cain looked up. He looked at Dane. He said they needed protection, not from monsters, from people. Dane nodded. He said he was a B-rank swordsman. That was enough. Cain shook his head. He said no. 1 swordsman against the guild isn't protection. It's a sacrifice. They need someone who knows how to protect, professionally, constantly,
Someone for whom this isn't a side job, but a calling. He found Lette Corvin 2 days later, not because he was looking for her specifically, because she found him. Saren mentioned her name, a former captain of the Imperial Guard, stripped of her rank for insubordination, refused to shoot unarmed protesters 2 years ago. Since then, she'd been working as a caravan guard, an A-rank spear carrier, a scar across her eyebrow. Cain asked Saren to arrange a meeting. Lette came to the guest quarters that evening, tall, broad-shouldered, moving like someone who always knows the way out. She looked at Cain, at the skinny boy in the chair. She asked why he had called her. Cain said he wanted to hire her. Lette asked what she would be guarding. Cain said to guard his family, his father, his brother, Eileen, Serene, everyone close to him. Lette narrowed her eyes. She said guarding people wasn't her thing. She transports cargo. Cain replied that he knew. He said he could see. He said that 2 years ago she had refused to shoot people because she hadn't taken up a spear to kill the unarmed. He said that since then, she hadn't been given a single assignment where she would be protecting living people. Just boxes, just bales, just sacks of grain, and that she'd forgotten why she'd taken up arms. Lette didn't move. Cain continued. He said he needed his father, brother, and friends to survive until winter. He said he was paying for that, not for the crates, for the people. Lette looked at him for a long time. Then she asked how much. Cain named the sum, 50 gold pieces a month, more than any caravan. Lette said she'd take 30. Cain asked why less. Lette didn't answer, but Cain saw it. Something lit up in her eyes, small, warm, forgotten. She stood up, said she'd start tomorrow. She left. Cain leaned back in his chair. He exhaled. Another asset in the portfolio. Another closed position. Another person who, for the first time in a long while, felt needed not as a tool, but as a human being. 2 coins clinked on the bedroom floor. One for Saren. The position was finally closed. The culprit had been found. The evidence had been handed over. Justice was in motion. The second was for Lette, for the woman who had guarded bags for 2 years and forgotten how to protect people. Cain picked up both. He counted the total balance. Coins. They were coming in faster. It was as if Maul sensed the stakes were rising. Cain secured an audience with the chairman of the Imperial Council and submitted 2 reports, one on the province's budget overruns, the second on Vincent Hale's shady finances. The council accepted the documents for review. Cain hires former guard captain Lette Corvin to protect the family. He receives 2 coins of intent for Saren and Lette. Hale struck faster than Cain had anticipated. On the 8th day in the capital, in the morning, Cain was sitting at the table in the guest room with Eileen when Lette entered without knocking. She said 4 people had pulled up to the building. Silver Vine Guild tokens. One of them was A-rank. She'd seen him move, a professional fighter. Cain wasn't surprised. He asked Eileen to gather the documents, everything, quickly. Eileen didn't ask a single question. A minute later, everything was in a bag. Cain called for Dane. He said they had to leave. Dane didn't ask where. He put on his sword. He stood by the door. Lette stood next to the spear. Serene checked the back exit. Clear. They went out through the back door. The carriage was waiting in the courtyard. Serene took the reins. They left the capital through the south gate while Hale's men were entering through the gates. In the carriage, Cain lay on the bench and counted. Hale had found out. Someone on the council had leaked the information, or the secretary, or Marcus Wayne himself. No, Marcus wouldn't have, too experienced. More likely one of the clerks in the chancellery through whose hands the documents had passed. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Hale now knew Cain Aldrich had compiled a report that could destroy him. And Hale acted, quickly. 4 fighters isn't murder, it's a capture. Hale wanted Cain alive. He wanted to find out how much he knew. He wanted to find out where the information came from. and he wanted to destroy the evidence. Cain closed his eyes. The evidence was in 3 places: a copy with Marcus Wayne, a copy in Eileen's bag, and a 3rd copy that Cain had mailed to the Aldrich estate addressed to his father. 3 copies, 3 safeguards, just as the market had taught him. Never put all your eggs in one basket. The carriage was heading south, toward Valgrren. Home. But Cain knew it wasn't safe at home anymore. Hale knew where he lived, knew where his family was, knew everything. He needed a plan, not an escape plan, a counterattack plan. On the 3rd day of the journey, Cain gathered everyone. The carriage stood on the side of the road, forest all around, silence. Cain sat leaning against a wheel. His body ached. The prognosis, 160 days until the end. He looked at the people around him. Dane, swordsman, strength. Lette, spearwoman, defense. Saren, investigator, information. Eileen, herbalist, support. 4 people, 4 functions, 4 covered risks, like a portfolio, diversified, balanced. Each covered what the others couldn't. Cain laid out the plan. They wouldn't run. They would return to Valgrren and force Hale to act openly. Because as long as Hale operated in the shadows, he had the advantage. But if they force him into the open, the advantage will shift to whoever has the evidence. Cain asked Saren to submit an official request to the Guild for a re-examination of the report on Alec's death, publicly, through all channels, so that the entire Guild knows. Saren understood. It's a provocation. If Hale stays silent, it means he's afraid. If he responds, it means he'll step into the open field where Cain plays better. Saren nodded. Dane asked what he should do. Cain said that Dane would go to the estate and pick up his father. He would bring him to the city, to Lady Graines's house. It's safe there. Graines owes the Aldriches, and she's the kind of person who remembers debts. Lette would be with her father. Eileen would be with Cain. In Valgrren, everything started moving quickly. Saren filed a request. Within a day, the news had spread throughout the Guild. A former investigator was demanding a review of a 4-year-old case, the death of a hunter in Dungeon 17. Suspicion of document forgery. The Guild was in an uproar. Hale called an emergency meeting. Cain watched from Lady Graines's house. Eileen brought news. Mira Han, the daughter of the Imperial cartographer whom Cain had met by chance at the market a month ago, and whom he had helped sell her dungeon maps to the Imperial headquarters for their true value, also brought information. Mira knew the geography of the province better than anyone else. She knew where Dungeon 17 was located. She knew all the approaches. She knew that Hale sent expeditions there twice a year, and she knew that no trophies ever came back from there. Cain listened. He was piecing it together, thinking. Hale wasn't extracting monsters or resources from Dungeon 17. He was looking for something else there, something worth spending 12,000 gold over 5 years, something worth killing Alec for. Cain didn't know what, but he knew he would find out soon. On the 9th day after returning to Valgrren, a summons arrived, an official one, on letterhead. The Imperial Council on Anomalous Phenomena summoned Vincent Hale, head of the Silver Vines Guild, to a closed-door meeting to provide explanations regarding the misuse of funds. Marcus Wayne did not disappoint. Cain held the paper and stared at the council's seal. Round 1. The ball is in play. The ball is in Hale's court. Hale sends men after Cain, but the group manages to leave the capital. Cain devises a plan for a counterattack. Saren files an open request to reopen the case regarding the death of her partner, provoking Hale to step out of the shadows. The Imperial Council officially summons Hale to a meeting to explain the financial irregularities. The meeting was scheduled for 12 days later, in Kairos. In the same Hall of Revelations where Cain first saw Cassia, Cain spent those 12 days preparing. Every morning, every hour of the breath of ashes, every minute. He wasn't preparing a speech. He was preparing an audit, a financial audit of Vincent Hale's activities over the past 20 years. Saren obtained the guild's archival data through her old contacts. Mira provided maps of all of Hale's expeditions, including the routes to Dungeon 17.
Eileen organized the documents. Dane provided security. Lette stood guard 20 hours a day and slept only when Dane relieved her. Cain entered the mall every night, not to shop, to read. The product index became his second library. He wasn't looking for weapons or potions. He was looking for information. And on the fourth night, he found it, in a section he'd previously skipped. Memory artifacts, a subsection, records of past customers. Cain froze. He read the description. The mall stored the records of every customer who had ever crossed its threshold, their purchases, their choices, their last day. Cain looked up at Yuna. He asked if he could read the records of the customer associated with Dungeon 17. Yuna was silent for a long time. Then she said that the rules didn't forbid reading the records, but they didn't allow it either. Cain asked what that meant. Yuna replied that it meant the decision was up to him. Cain placed a coin on the counter. Yuna didn't take it. She said the records weren't for sale. They were for reading, for free. The coin was needed for something else. He would pay for what he read later, when he understood with what. Cain took the coin back.
Yuna led him down the far corridor of the mall. That very one, with the portraits. 112 faces, dates beneath each one. Cain walked along the wall and read. Names, dates, positions. Each of these people had been a buyer. Each had been given a chance, and each in the end had accepted the position, had become a keeper, like Yuna. Cain stopped at one portrait, a middle-aged man, a stern face, a military bearing. Caption, Keeper Valgrren, term fulfilled. Dates, 20 years ago. Cain looked at Yuna. He asked who Valgrren was. Yuna replied that Valgrren was a buyer before her. He found Dungeon 17. More accurately, Dungeon 17 found him. Because Dungeon 17 isn't a dungeon, it's a second entrance to the mall, a back door, the one that shouldn't exist. Valgrren discovered it and tried to use it to enter the mall without coins of intent, through the back door. He died. The entrance remained, and 20 years later, Hale found it. Cain stood in the corridor with the portraits, and the world around him shifted. Hale wasn't exploring the dungeon. Hale was looking for the entrance to the mall. 12,000 gold pieces over 5 years, 6 expeditions.
Alec died because he accidentally got too close to what Hale was hiding. And the entire province revolved around a door that shouldn't exist. Cain returned to the counter. Yuna was standing in the same spot. He asked if Hale knew what the mall was. Yuna replied that Hale knew there was something behind the door of Dungeon 17, but he didn't know exactly what, and he can't go in, because the black entrance requires the same thing as the regular one, a coin of intent, and Hale hasn't earned a single one in his entire life. Cain almost laughed. S rank, guildmaster, 20 years in power, and not a single coin. Because Hale has never in his life closed someone else's position, never felt another's pain and resolved it. He was too busy with his own gain. The mall cannot be bought by force. Mall is won over by attention to people, and Hale was not granted that attention. The day of the hearing, the Hall of Revelations. Cain sat in the front row, not in the back. Eileen and Serene sat beside him. Dane and Lette stood behind him. Kasia sat in the Imperial family's box on the balcony. Cain felt her gaze. Across the table, at the defendant's table, sat Vincent Hale, tall, Gray-haired, with the face of a man accustomed to winning. He looked at Cain. Cain looked at him. 2 gazes, one accustomed to killing with a sword, the other accustomed to killing with documents. Marcus Vane opened the session. Cain stood up. He walked to the podium. His body was trembling. Prognosis, 142 days, less than 5 months. But his voice was steady. He began to speak. He didn't accuse, he didn't shout. He simply laid out the facts,
column by column, year by year. 12,000 gold pieces, 6 expeditions to the sealed dungeon, a forged report, the death of the hunter Alec, falsification of the expert report, systematic embezzlement of guild funds. Cain spoke for 40 minutes. The hall was silent. Hale listened with a stony face. When Cain finished, Hale stood up. He looked out at the hall. He said it was all a lie. He said that an F-rank boy was trying to destroy a hero of the Empire. He said the council shouldn't listen to a dying child. Cain pulled the last document out of the folder. The results of the Truth Feather verification, officially certified by the council expert who had tested Cain's skill the day before and confirmed his.
Every forgery in Hale's reports was dated and attributed. Every lie was marked. Every stolen gold coin was traced. Cain placed the document on the table in front of Marcus Wayne. He turned to Hale, and he said quietly that before calling someone a liar, it was worth checking whether the lie had been written in his own ink. Hale turned pale. Marcus Wayne took the document. He read it for 10 minutes. Then he raised his head. He looked at the guard. He nodded. Hale was arrested in the hall, silently, without resistance. He walked between 2 guards and stared straight ahead, not at Cain, into the void. Like a man who had spent 20 years building a wall and suddenly saw that it stood on sand. Cain sat on a bench and breathed. His body was shaking. Eileen held his hand. Dane stood nearby. Lisette didn't take her hand off the spear. Seren sat motionless, staring at the spot where, a minute ago, the man responsible for Alec's death had been sitting. Her face was calm. For the first time in 4 years, truly calm. That evening, Cain stood on the balcony of the guest rooms. The city below glowed with lights. 142 days. His body was tired. His core ached, but he was alive. And for the first time in all that time, he thought about what he had been trying not to think about the position, about the fine print in Maul's rules. A buyer who has crossed the 365-day threshold is obligated to accept the position. Cain had lived in this world for 170 days. If his calculations were correct and his body held out, if Gray Dawn and Breath of Ash continued to work, if he found something else in the Maul that extends his time, then he'll cross the threshold, and the Maul will present the bill. Cain took a coin out of his pocket, the last one he'd earned. He twirled it between his fingers. He looked at it, small, silver, warm. It held his whole life. Every coin was a person he'd helped. Every coin was a day he'd bought. Every coin was a step away from death and a step towards something he didn't yet know. The balcony door opened. Una stood in the doorway. For the first time outside the Maul. For the first time in this world. In the winter coat that Cain had bought for her 3 days ago at the corner shop. She didn't know how to walk on snow. Her feet slipped. She grabbed the railing. Cain approached. He took her by the hand. Una looked at him, at the thin boy with gray skin and eyes in which numbers burned. She asked quietly, "Am I no longer a keeper?" Cain squeezed her hand. He replied that she was no longer a keeper. Una blinked. A tear rolled down her cheek, the first in 20 years. She didn't know her brother had died. Cain knew and didn't tell her, because right now she was standing in the snow. For the first time in 20 years, she was breathing air that smelled not of dust and wax, but of winter and smoke and life. And that was enough, for today. The rest tomorrow. Down in the city, lights were burning. Somewhere far away in the corridors of the one-coin mall, for the first time in 200 years, one of the display windows went dark. The first, not the last. Cain stood on the balcony, holding the hand of the girl who had been a prisoner of the world's oldest debt instrument for 20 years. And he knew this was only the beginning, that there were still 112 names on the wall ahead.
that the position and its terms lay ahead, that the second candidate the mall was supposed to take instead of him lay ahead.
That a war lay ahead, not fought with swords, but with contracts and clauses and fine print. But now, at this very moment, on this balcony, snow fell on Yuna's hair and melted away, and Cain Aldrich, a financial analyst from Boston, an 18-year-old boy with an F rank and a life expectancy of 142 days, thought for the first time that the balance of his life was finally in the black. Cain learns that Dungeon 17 is the back entrance to the mall and that Hale had been trying to get in there for 20 years. At a closed session of the Imperial Council, Cain presents a complete body of evidence and Hale is arrested. Yuna steps out of the mall into the real world for the first time. Cain releases her from the position of overseer. The first arc is complete, but ahead lies the mystery of the office and the second candidate whom the mall chose instead of Cain.